What's up, guys? It's Toad back with you as usual, except that it is the new year now, and I just completed my second losing year ever in 18 years. So, isn't that fun? Both times they came on the heels of a really good year, and this time a couple of really good years. But you guys only got the back half of my second good year there, which wasn't as good as 2022, but whatever. It's a new year. Fuck it. I'm gonna put it all behind. Let's start getting some wins right away here. I got 2 plays today. I think I'm being pretty selective here. All of my plays are in college basketball and football, and I'm skipping NBA and NHL. Although there's only one game, but I'll give you a lean on that game anyway. Yesterday, really, I think my only bad loser was the San Jose Sharks. They just can't get it together. Fuck them. But I don't think my other losers even really were that valid. I started off nice with blowout win on St. Louis. VCU, they had to make a huge comeback, and they did take the lead towards the end. So it looked like they might be able to get that done, and then they wound up not winning. Close finish there. And then I had Duquesne was a nice, easy win as well. And then things started going haywire. Well, the Milwaukee Bucks, actually, they won. They had a huge comeback in the second half of that game. They were losing by double digits in the first half, and I was like, oh, God, this is dead. But they had a massive comeback. That was a spot. There was no way I wasn't going to play the Bucks in a spot like that, fading the Pacers. Pacers defense collapsed, which is pretty predictable, to be honest. And then the Baylor Texas bowl game, come on, man. All the bowls were just such bullshit yesterday. Had I'm pretty sure Washington outgained Louisville by almost 200 yards, and they didn't win the game. They went for 2 to try to win it on the last touchdown, and that did not happen, I think. Baylor, they put themselves in a huge hole right away by throwing a pick six almost right near the beginning of the game. Then they wound up allowing a kick return touchdown a little while later. So it's you can't overcome that, really. But Baylor, they outgained LSU in the game. Just really, really pisses me off. I don't know what else we could say about this. And then everybody's, of course, shitting on Alabama. Oh, Alabama proved that they're not good, that they don't belong. Come on, man. Do you think they really looked like they cared about the ReliaQuest Bowl? I know I handicapped that, and I said it looked like they were going to try to show up in that game, and they didn't have too many players out for that game, but they did not look like a motivated team, man. You can't tell me that you watched some of that game and thought that they were actually really trying to compete that hard in that game. I think they still had a lot of the earmarks of a disappointed team in that one. And Michigan still at least plays pretty good defense, even though I know they had lost some defensive players there, but whatever. And then the playoffs seem to be easier to handicap as every favorite has won and covered so far. And I've been right about every single one of those, even though I only won money on one of them. The Ohio State one was the only one that I bet. Speaking of that, I'll talk about Ohio State in a little while later in the show. But yeah, I was right about Penn State, even though, they had to get a late touchdown to get that over the number there. They were winning by 10 for, I would say, a majority of that game. But that is James Franklin's MO. When he's winning and he's beating an inferior team, he tries to run up the score pretty much. So you kind of had to expect that was coming. And then Boise did kind of get back down in scoring range at the end. I think they really advanced the ball on a big penalty, though, on Penn State. So I don't know. Boise tried to go for it on 4th down, I'm pretty sure, and failed anyway. Penn State, as I said, as I handicapped that game, they were the best defense that Boise State was going to face. And Boise State definitely got held down by Penn State's defense in that game. So, I had that correct. But we'll talk about the college football playoffs today as it's New Year's Day. Happy New Year, everyone. Hopefully everybody was safe last night and didn't go too far with their celebration there, as some people did, which I'll talk about when I talk about the Sugar Bowl, which is tonight's game. I forgot to mention, because I always just make fun of the sponsors. The Fiesta Bowl last night was sponsored by Verbo, but I'm like, what are they? They're what? They're a phone company. I don't even know who they are. Who the hell is Verbo? I don't even know. But they've been sponsoring the Fiesta Bowl for a few years now. Jameson, what's up? Thanks for hanging out. Happy New Year. Sped, what's going on? Thanks, guys, for hanging out in the chat here. We can get to today's plays, man. It's a new year. We got new games going on. We got some college basketball today. Not a ton, but some. I don't know how many of these games are even really that interesting, to be honest. I mean, we do have some conference matchups here, but really, I mean, none of them are really that great. I mean, UConn, I think, is the only ranked team playing today. They're at DePaul. I mean, DePaul started out the season pretty well, but they faced a pretty weak non-conference schedule. So now that they're facing Big East opponents, it's like, I don't know. Are they really going to be able to compete? They're probably better than they were last year. I mean, you couldn't really be worse than last year, but UConn's still lined as a huge road favorite here from 9 to 12. Going through the 12, even though they are public, of course, as well. 65% of tickets, 60% of the cash. I'm not going to come in and take the points with DePaul here, man. I mean, I'm just going to let most of these go, but that game is one of them. We have these weird, like, ACC matchups now where, like, Cal is in the ACC now, so they're having to go to Pittsburgh to play a conference game. Could be difficult. Like, I have handicapped in football over the past year, and you have one of these new teams in this conference, and they're going to a place that they don't usually play, and it's like way out of their time zone. And it also goes for the other teams going in the reverse, right? Like if Pitt was having to go out to the Pacific Coast and play like Cal, Stanford, whatever, that might be a bad spot for them going, unfamiliar travel, unfamiliar venue. But Cal coming to Pitt, it's probably, it's going to be an unfamiliar venue to them. And I think Pitt is pretty good, and they're kind of flying under the radar. The odds makers are telling you they're way better than Cal, up from 14 to 14.5. So it looks like some money is kind of coming in on the Pitt side there. I mean, I'm not going to touch these games, but that's what's going on there. And then North Carolina, Louisville actually might be the best game of the entire college basketball slate here. And this is a hard game for me to handicap. Louisville up from a pick 'em to -1.5. So they're favored at home. Odds makers still telling you North Carolina is the better team, and I agree with that. North Carolina, they've faced one of the most difficult schedules in the entire country, man. In North Carolina, they have a bunch of losses, but every one of North Carolina's losses is to like a top 20 team, at least as far as like KenPom's rankings are concerned. I mean, they lost to Kansas, Auburn, Michigan State, Alabama, Florida. Every one of these teams is one of the top teams in the nation, basically. So at worst, I think all those teams are in the top 30, probably the top 25, top 20, based on KenPom's rankings. So North Carolina, I mean, the issue is they haven't stepped up that well in class, but Louisville's really going to be a little bit of a step down in class for North Carolina. They did beat UCLA a couple games ago, and they didn't really have a letdown after that. I mean, that looked like kind of a sandwich spot against Campbell. They didn't cover. They were 28.5-point favorite, and they only won by 16. So, I mean, I guess that was kind of the sandwich spot. They kind of just got in and got out against Campbell. So I kind of like North Carolina in this game, man. They're the better team. The odds makers are telling you they're the better team. I don't really trust Louisville right now because they've had some real stinkers. Although Louisville, they face a difficult schedule too. I mean, their best win is, I guess, West Virginia. Indiana, I mean, they're not what we thought they were at the beginning of the season. They're really not even close to being a ranked team. Losing to Tennessee, we know Tennessee is really good. Oklahoma is really good. Ole Miss is really good. Duke is really good. Kentucky is really good. So all of those are not bad losses, really. But again, both of these teams actually kind of similar in that they've lost. Most of their losses have been to top 30 or so teams, and they only have like one really nice win, although North Carolina's win over UCLA is a better win than anything Louisville has. So even though the market looks like it is indicating on the Louisville side, I don't really agree with it. With Louisville going from pick 'em to 1.5, but we do see 91% of the cash on UNC here at 65% of the tickets. I think North Carolina is still the better team. They face one of the most difficult schedules in the entire country. Even though Louisville's has been difficult, North Carolina's has been even more difficult. Even though I think North Carolina does like to run, speed it up, and Louisville's probably going to try to slow it down a little bit. But Louisville's had some really bad offensive performances. So North Carolina, you're looking at the better team, the better offense. So that's the way that I would lean in that one, in what's probably the biggest college basketball game. Andrew, what's up? Happy New Year to you as well. You're going to be doing a lot of Rumble super chats, I guess, for Tower Gang. You're no longer giving them to Timcast. All right. I like that. Yeah. Pay us instead of Timcast, man. He's got enough money. Tower Gang, baby. We'll be on tonight, by the way. It is a Wednesday night, and we will be back resuming basically a normal schedule. So I still have to set up the streams, but there will be Tower Gang tonight at 9:11 p.m. Eastern. And then I don't know if I want to talk about any of the rest of these games here. I mean, a lot of these games are just not great. I mean, Villanova and Butler is a decent Big East matchup just because neither of these teams are that good. Villanova's laying 2 on the road, so the odds makers telling you they're the better team. I don't disagree with that, but neither of these teams are very good this year. 53% of tickets, 70% of the cash coming in on Butler. I mean, I don't really have that much of a reason to disagree with the Butler side here. I mean, Butler's probably going to try to speed the game up a little bit. Villanova likes to play really ugly and really slow. Villanova's playing a second straight road game. They went into Creighton. They lost. I think I won on Creighton in that game, but how long ago was that game? That game was before the break. So, I mean, Villanova, I mean, they've had a lot of time off and they didn't go into the break on a high note. They lost to Creighton, but it was still a tough game. So I don't know. So they've had a lot of time off. So really, it's not really a second straight road game. If you think about it, they're just kind of going out on the road to start a new stretch of games here. So I don't know. Butler probably is being a little bit undervalued. I mean, Butler's faced a difficult schedule. I mean, more difficult than Villanova's probably. I mean, they beat Northwestern. They beat Mississippi State. Those are nice wins at the very least. Beating SMU's not bad either. Losing to Houston, I mean, they got kind of blown out, but Houston's really good. Then they lost kind of a sandwich spot there against North Dakota State. North Dakota State's not even that bad either. And then they had a stretch of Wisconsin, Marquette, and UConn, and they actually played pretty well in every one of those games. So to me, it's looking like Butler is probably the right side here. I mean, they faced a more difficult schedule, and then now they have a break after that really difficult stretch. So they're coming out of the break after that. So they faced a more difficult schedule than Villanova has, man. So that's kind of the way that I would lean there. I actually have one play in college basketball, as I said, and it is in one of the lower games here. And this is a game where I'm going completely against the market. I think it's a situational spot. It's Missouri State -4.5. Hopefully I'm not screwing up to start the new year, man. I want to get off on the right foot here. Missouri State's sitting at 4.5. You might get a better number than that. Actually, I think there are 4s out there right now. I'll have to check. We might be able to call it Missouri State -4 here. 4 a little bit better than 4.5 in basketball because it's 2-point buckets. So I would look for that. I actually think there are 4s out there right now. 60% of tickets, 79% of the cash on Valpo, though, but 60% of tickets on Missouri State. I mean, Missouri State's going to be the public side, and I don't know if the cash is still going to wind up on the Valpo side by the time this game tips off at 8 p.m. It's looking like you might not have to play Missouri State right now, really, because public is probably not going to be coming in on this game that heavily. And if the money is coming in on Valpo, at least for now, you might get a little bit of a better number on Missouri State. But I think the spot sets up correctly for Missouri State. I mean, they're the better team, although not by that much. But, I mean, they have faced BC and only lost by 2. South Dakota State's pretty good. Indiana State's not really that bad. Washington State is a bigger conference team as well. Butler's a Big East team. They only lost by 7. They beat High Point. High Point is pretty good. They beat UC Santa Barbara, who's also pretty good. So, I mean, Missouri State, I mean, their resume isn't that awful. I think they're better than Valpo by a little bit more than what the odds makers are giving you here with they're basically almost just getting home court and maybe a little bit above home court. Ken Baum has these teams really close, though. So he does have Missouri State only winning this game by a few points, and he has them barely better than Valpo, but I think it's a little bit more significant than that, to be honest. Missouri State, they're also in the right situation for this. They just lost as a road favorite at Evansville. That's a bad loss, man. Evansville, not a good team at all. And Missouri State went in there and lost the game, had a really bad. I mean, look at the shooting performance from Missouri State in this game. You tell me they're not going to kind of like progress back to a mean from this, from shooting 25.9% from the floor and 20% from 3. That looks like a major outlier to me. They had a really horrific shooting performance. Even if you're not a very good shooting team, I mean, that is beyond a bad shooting night there. Bad game. I expect a bounce back from Missouri State here, man. That is such an ugly loss there. And they're still looking for their first conference win in the Missouri Valley Conference. So they're competing against Valpo, who also is looking for their first. But this is also going to be not their home opener. It's their second straight home game. But the other home game they played in the conference was against Indiana State, and they actually only lost by 3. Pretty competitive game for Missouri State back there. Not a bad performance from them, and that was a while ago. So this is their first conference home game, basically, in the new the new stretch of games here, like since like official conference play actually starts pretty much. That game, by the way, was a few days ago where they lost to Evansville. So they came out of the break. That was also a bad spot if you think about it, because they went into the break having won 2 games in a row, including that game against Santa Barbara. Huge wins. So they came out of the break. I think their momentum was stalled. Didn't have a good game. Now this is bounce back time. I know they do have Bradley up next, which is a big game, but I think when you lose that ugly and you're still 0-2 in conference, I don't think you're going to overlook anybody really. So I think Missouri State should show up in this game. On the other hand, Valpo, looking at their schedule, they went into the break on 2 straight wins. So they went into the holiday break with a little bit of momentum, having put up over 100 points in their last game, although it was against Calumet, who is not a Division I team. And they might be up in the area of Wisconsin where they are making a murderer shit happen, Stephen Avery, whatever. But they came out of the break and they actually had a really good game against Bradley, who's one of the best teams in the Missouri Valley, if not the best. Well, actually, it's between Bradley and Drake, really, just like it was last year. So Drake is probably still the best. Bradley, the second best. But look at what Valpo did, man. And this was on Sunday. They took Bradley into double overtime as a 14.5-point underdog. Valpo almost pulled off this huge upset against Bradley. They were winning early. They fell behind, and then they actually came back and were able to send it into overtime. And then they finally, I think just they didn't have enough left in the tank. Bradley had a particularly bad shooting performance from 3, really, 28%. Probably not going to see that again. Valpo somehow out-rebounded them, which is crazy. When you have a performance like that, man, if you're Valpo, I don't think that sets up very nicely for you in the next game, man. It's a second straight road game. Coming off that type of effort, I don't see it. I don't know how you get back up off the mat after that. After you put in an effort like that, you're one of the lowest teams in the conference, and you take one of the top teams in the conference on their own floor to the wire, not only to the wire, but into double overtime. I don't think they're going to have much left in the tank here at all. And this is, I believe, a huge hangover spot for Valpo, and it is, I think, a bounce back spot and a focus spot for Missouri State here. So I don't like that the market looks like it's completely disagreeing with me on this, but I think it's the right spot for Missouri State. So Missouri State is the play there, minus the points, whatever you can get on that as far as the best number is concerned. Let's go to NHL. We have one NHL game today, which you would think this would be the Winter Classic. The Winter Classic was yesterday, and it was in Chicago at Wrigley Field, and it was kind of a disappointment. St. Louis blew out the Blackhawks, but like, who schedules that, man? It's the Blues and the Blackhawks. Like, do you really think those teams are going to be good this year? And that's the Winter Classic. No offense to the fans of those teams, but man, I mean, it was bad. And St. Louis won, I think 6-2 or something. The Winter Classic, if you guys don't know, it's been around for a while now, and there's one game. I thought it was usually on New Year's Day, but it was New Year's Eve. Maybe it's always on New Year's Eve. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But it was on New Year's Eve yesterday. I think it's usually in the afternoon though, but yesterday's game was like in the evening, so it was like at nighttime, which is even more strange to me because usually I think it's during the day. And what it is it's an outdoor hockey game in cold weather somewhere. So like, it's been in Boston a couple of times. It's been in Chicago. I think it's been in New York. Probably. I think it's been in Seattle. So they actually take over a baseball field and they put a hockey rink in the middle of it and play outside. So that's what happened. It was at Wrigley Field yesterday. It's been at Fenway Park before. Fenway Park, kid. So whatever. That was yesterday. So this is not the Winter Classic. This is New Jersey at LA is the only hockey game today. It looks like it's going to be a decent game, man. And the market looks like it is indicating on the Devils side. And I don't really disagree with that. LA is down from -120 to -106. 87% of tickets, 51% of the cash. So the public still disrespecting the Devils, man. And this is actually Devils against the Angels, right? It's the Devils against the City of Angels. Crazy. But I think, yeah, I'm surprised that the public is coming in on the Kings to that extent, but I guess they just like the Kings better than the Devils, and the Devils still continue to fly under the radar here, man. I don't quite get it. The only thing that kind of keeps me off of wanting to play the Devils here really is that they're on a back-to-back. They played yesterday, and the Kings did not. So the Devils did play yesterday, but they had a bad game, man, and they lost to Anaheim yesterday. So The one thing is that New Jersey's not going to be well rested, but they're really not traveling far. I mean, they're just basically going 30 minutes up the road from Anaheim to LA. So that's why it's been scheduled as a back-to-back like this. So I think New Jersey is still going to show up in this game. I think they're kind of looking at it like we're going to have more focus on one of these two games, and it was not the game against Anaheim yesterday. I don't know what they're going to do with their goaltender situation because Markstrom is their better goalie. He played yesterday, but we might get Allen today just because it is a back-to-back. So that would be a little bit of a downgrade for New Jersey. But I think yesterday was a bad spot for New Jersey as well, kind of, because they were going to have two games against Carolina. I know they lost the second one kind of badly, and then they had a little bit of time off, and they went out to the Pacific Coast. I think maybe they were looking ahead to this isolated game here, which is not even really on national TV. It's just on NHL Network. So I don't know, but I'm kind of surprised it doesn't get like the television nod here because it is the only hockey game today, but I don't know. But they are in the back-to-back, so it's a little bit of a tough rest spot there, but I do expect them to show up, especially after not playing well yesterday. Kings, on the other hand, I mean, they've been playing pretty well. They've had a couple of days off, so they've had more rest. They haven't played since Sunday, and that was the game where they beat me and they escaped against the Philadelphia Flyers. I thought it was a bad spot, man, because LA was coming off that big overtime win against Edmonton, and they had this New Jersey game up next. So I thought they were going to be caught in a letdown spot, a sandwich spot against Philadelphia, and it probably should have happened. Philadelphia was winning that game 4-2, and then they blew it with Will Ferrell in the audience as a drunk Buddy the Elf. I don't know. He does not look good right now, man. He looks like a sad person. And if I was going down deep into the woke Hollywood rabbit hole like he is, I would probably be a very sad person as well. The LA Kings, not that I'm not, but my sadness only comes from my degenerate gambling when it doesn't win. When I win, I'm happy, man. LA Kings, yeah, I mean, they are coming off. They were able to finally win that game, so it wasn't really the greatest performance for them. So really, it's a situation where kind of both teams are probably going to show up in this game. So I don't know. I mean, it's actually a little bit of a tough read, which of course is why I'm not playing this game, but interesting game. The market read looks to be indicating pretty strongly on the Devils side with the kind of reverse line movement against the public Kings team. So that's the way I look at that game. We do have NBA today, and I'm skipping the entire NBA card. There's a lot of NBA games. Well, not a lot, but a decent amount of NBA games, but I just don't think I can do it, man. I mean, you got the Magic. They're coming off barely beating Brooklyn, so it looks like it should kind of be a bounce-back spot for Orlando, but Orlando, they're still dealing with a major injury problem here, man. I mean, Banchero is looking like he's probably going to come back within the next week or so, but he's not back yet. Wagner, I think, is out for a longer period of time than that, so Orlando's still shorthanded, but they are coming off a bad performance against Brooklyn, so going out on the road after that, and the fact that they won at least to kind of build some new winning momentum there, it might be a case where maybe they'll show up for this game against Detroit, but I don't know. Detroit, I mean, they are returning home from a road trip, so it does look like kind of a bad spot for Detroit. So I do lean to Orlando here, but Detroit, I mean, they've had some time off, but again, I always say that when you have that a little bit of extra time off and it's just a couple of days, it kind of exacerbates the return home spot just a little bit because you return home, you get distracted. You're like returning back to family life. You have stuff to do at home. Detroit has been on the road. Well, actually, I think we can say that it's mitigated a little bit because Detroit was actually, this was not actually a 4-game road trip because the holiday break split it up. So really, it was only a 2-game road trip that took them to Sacramento and Denver. So they've only been out for like less than a week. So I think it's a little bit less of a problem for Detroit. I would still slightly lean to the Magic in that one, but I don't want to do it. And it looks like the money is coming in on Detroit up from 1.5 to 2, 81% of tickets, 95% of the cash. I won't be doing it though. No thanks on that one. And then you have this awful game between Brooklyn and Toronto here. Brooklyn coming off almost beating the Magic. So it looks like they're kind of in a bad spot. Laying points on the road at Toronto. Toronto played yesterday, but they lost by 54 points to the Celtics yesterday. So that was a game where the Celtics, as I mentioned on my show yesterday, the Celtics were in kind of a bounce back spot after having lost another game as a double-digit favorite. But I wasn't totally convinced that like both teams weren't going to show up in that game. But the Raptors are just so bad that they completely fell apart in the second half of the Celtics, turned what was only like a 10, 15-point lead into a monster lead. So the Raptors, I mean, they've lost so many games in a row by so many points. It's just crazy. It's like something has to happen where you'd think the Raptors would be so embarrassed that they're going to show up at some point. So situationally, it looks like the Raptors would be the side in this game, even though they aren't a back-to-back with travel. So there's no way I'm going to come in and try to play that. But 84% of the tickets on the Raptors, really, the Raptors are public. I don't even see how that's possible. There's no way that I see the Raptors being public against anybody at this point. And then even though the Nets are bad, they're not as bad as the Raptors. But 78% of tickets, so it looks like the market actually seems to be indicating on the side of the Nets. Man, that's just crazy. I'm not going to play it. And then you got Heat Pelicans. Heat down from 9 to 8.5. They're very public. 93% of tickets, 77% of the cash. The Heat, I mean, it does look like a spot where you might want to try to go against the Heat here. But again, I can't play on the Pelicans, man, even though I know they covered their last game. But the Heat, they're returning home from a road trip. It was not a long road trip. They really just stayed in like the South. They just went to Orlando, Atlanta, and then out to Houston. But they pulled off a nice road upset win over Houston there, which I think was still without Butler. I don't know when Butler's coming back. So that's something you got to take a look at as well. They're returning home from a road trip here, and they have Indiana up next, which maybe will draw their focus a little bit more. I mean, I think basically every team is going to overlook New Orleans at this point, man, because New Orleans, even though they have McCollum back, they have Trey Murphy, the third back. I think Ingram is out. Zion Williamson is out, and New Orleans just hasn't been a complete team all year, but they've still also been way underperforming their talent level too. They just haven't gotten it together. So Miami returning home from a road trip, kind of a distracted spot to some extent, but it wasn't a long road trip. And New Orleans, I don't think I can come in on New Orleans because they're just such an injured team, but they also just put a nice performance together and almost beat the Clippers. And they actually played competitively against Memphis the game before that. But, I mean, they've been playing competitive in a lot of these games, so at least that's one thing you can say. They've been keeping a lot of games close, but at some point it's like, are they going to be too tired to do that in another game, especially when it's a one-game road trip out to Miami? I don't know, man. We'll see what happens. I'm not going to try to take a shot on this one. It's an injured New Orleans team. You have to see if Butler's coming back. Let me see. Or Butler might already be back, actually. If he is back, then that would mean that Miami was in an reverse injured player spot in whatever game he came back. And was he there on the 29th? I'm not sure that he was. Let me see. No, it looks like he was not. Return to competition, reconditioning. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. If Butler's coming back in this game, which I don't even know. New Orleans is so bad. I can't even tell if this line is telling you that Butler's coming back or not. But if Butler's coming back, it's going to be a reverse injured player spot for the Heat as well, where, like I always say, when you have your star players out for a while and then he comes back, the line has to move to account for him being back, but it usually overreacts a little bit. And usually that team doesn't do well, like right out of the gate with that team back. They have to like regain that chemistry again. So if Butler is coming back in this game, that would be actually be another reason to fade the Heat in this first game with him coming back. So there's so many moving parts in this game. I'm not going to do anything with it. And then you do have Mavs Rockets is a pretty good game today. Rockets down from 5.5 to 5, but Mavs getting a lot of public action, 78% of tickets, 74% of the cash. I think the public thinking, well, the Mavs are still one of the best teams in the West. We think that it looks like there's value getting points, right? But remember that Luka is out for the Mavs. So that's part of the reason why the Rockets are such a decent sized favorite in this game. So I think the Rockets would be not considered to be the better team if Luka was playing, but he's not. He's out for a while now. So that is the reason why the line is where it is. And I don't know if I would necessarily disagree with the Houston side in this one, based on the fact that the Mavs are so public, fading that public sentiment, especially when the public is on an underdog like this. A lot of times you do want to fade a public underdog. I mean, Dallas, they were just out on the Pacific coast, and now they're returning to Texas. So it's almost possible they might even be trying to get like a few things done at home and then go into this game against Houston. And then they have Cleveland in 2 days. So it might even be a little bit of a look ahead here, even though Houston is not really a team you're going to want to overlook. But I don't know if the scheduling spot is really that great for them. They did lose their last game to Sacramento, which not a very great loss there, but Sacramento is probably better than their record would indicate, and they finally won a game. Houston, though, they just lost as a home favorite to Miami. As I mentioned, a Butler-less Miami. They were coming off a really tough battle against Minnesota, and they had Dallas up next. So that was actually a sandwich spot for Houston there. So I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at my video on that to see why I didn't play Miami in that game. I don't think I had any bet in that game, but looked like a spot to play Miami in that game. Houston, yeah, again, I mean, it looked like a sandwich spot for them. They played so tough against Minnesota, and they had Dallas and then Boston up after this. Houston, of course, they're going to be focused on Dallas, and they're kind of in a bounce back spot, and they're not traveling. So it does look like Houston is probably the right side in that one. I can't play it, though. And then we do get Hawks and Nuggets as a decent game as well. Nuggets sitting at 5.5. It's not really moving. 65% of the cash on the Nuggets. And it looks like the public, again, it looks like we might have a little bit of a public underdog in this one with the Hawks. So again, I always say I like to fade the public, but especially if you're fading an underdog. Public underdogs are usually like kind of the death knell. So I would only probably look to the Nuggets side of this one. As far as the situation, I don't know that there's a whole lot to be gathered from this. Although Atlanta, I mean, I know they beat Toronto. Toronto's an easy team to beat. Now they're having to go from Toronto with only a couple of days off into elevation, into Denver. And they might be feeling a little bit good about themselves, having scored 120 plus points in 3 straight games, 136 in their last game. I don't care if it was Toronto. If you beat a team by 30 points, you put up 136, you're feeling a little bit decent about yourselves. But the issue I have with fading the Hawks here is that they lost bad to Denver back on the 8th at home. So it's not like they're not going to be focused on Denver here, man. I mean, they lost by 30 points at home against Denver, and Trae Young was not out for that game. He played in that game, so I know he was out for a little while in there. But Atlanta may want that road revenge here, so that's a little bit of an angle that would slightly indicate towards the Atlanta side there. But, I mean, the market does look like it's indicating on Denver. Denver, they just went to Utah and they won. I mean, they basically just kind of have momentum right now, and they're coming back home. So their travel spot is a little bit better than Atlanta's is. That's really the edge that Denver has, and the fact that I think they're the better team. And the fact that Denver is laying 5.5 points should tell you that Denver is the better team, but the record hasn't really been that good so far. And they kind of need to start turning it around a little bit if they're going to try to compete in the West. They'll make the playoffs. I mean, almost every team makes the playoffs, but still, it's a little bit of a situation there, let's say. And then we do have Kings Sixers. Kings down from 7 to 6.5. So money looks like it's moving towards the 76ers. Kings 77% of the tickets on them, 90% of the cash on the Sixers. So it looks like we have a public versus pros discrepancy in this game too. I don't know if I would necessarily disagree with it. I mean, Philadelphia, they do have momentum right now. They're playing well. They beat Boston on Christmas. It was a huge win, and then had to go out to Utah, bad spot, and they still won, even though they didn't cover. Probably should have been a spot where maybe I should have jumped on Utah there. Then I actually played the Sixers in the next game because Portland was coming off a big upset of Dallas, which I was also on. I was on Portland in the game against Dallas, and then I was on Philadelphia in this game. So a couple of wins for me there. Philadelphia beat Portland, but I mean, that's just going to be kind of a momentum continuer out to Sacramento here. They do have Golden State up tomorrow, though. So that gives me a little bit of pause. Is that a bit of a look ahead? Because you might overlook Sacramento with how bad they've been playing recently. So that's the one thing about I kind of don't want to really come in and try to play the Sixers in this one, even though I think probably the Sixers are still being a little bit undervalued. But I think both of these teams are being undervalued at this point. I think both teams are better than their record indicates, but I don't know. It's a tough read, man. But Sacramento, you could argue they're in a letdown spot, though, because they just beat Dallas. I mean, Dallas was the Western Conference champs last year. That's a big win, but it did break a huge loss streak for them. So you could argue that's like a momentum continuer now, and that broke that losing momentum. So now it can just kind of play with confidence coming out of that. But are they going to be overconfident now and in a letdown spot because that win was so significant against Dallas? I don't know. And they have Memphis and Golden State up after this, so they may not care as much about a below 500 76ers team, even though the 76ers are finally intact and playing good basketball. So this is a difficult handicap as well in this game, man. Will, what's up, man? Thank you. You always comment with the same thing, Will. I appreciate it. Thank you for the words. And then let's go to college football, man. We have the playoffs happening. The playoffs, the first game up is at 1 p.m. Eastern, I think, which is Texas and Arizona State, which is it's the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. So, of course, it's Chick-fil-A. So, that's going to be in Atlanta, and it is. And, they're playing at the Falcons stadium there I forget what's the name of the stadium there. I can't remember what it is, but that's where it's being played in the dome there. Which they have this weird thing where they don't serve Chick-fil-A because Chick-fil-A is closed on Sunday, right? So it's like, why would you have Chick-fil-A in an NFL stadium if they can't be open on Sunday? Yeah, whatever. It's a weird situation, but today's not Sunday, so Chick-fil-A will be open, including at the stadium. So go get your Chick-fil-A, baby, and go watch this game between Texas and Arizona State. As you know, if you saw my bracket special episode, I have Texas winning the whole thing in my bracket. And a lot of it was because the path was nice for Texas to get pretty far in this thing. I mean, as I said, you knew Texas was going to be a big favorite in this game, and they are. They're down a little bit from 13.5 to 13 with juice. They got 66% of the tickets and cash on them. I'm not sure that I would disagree with laying the points with Texas in this one, though, man. It just looks too similar to the first round of playoff games where when two teams are both going to show up here, you want to kind of look to the better team to some extent, man. At least if they're not like hideously public, which I don't think they are in this case. So I slightly lean to Texas in this one. Texas, I mean, I think it sets up better for them, man, because they played last week. So they got that first playoff game out of the way as well. So they won. They beat Clemson. They didn't look like world beaters in doing so. They won by 14. They still covered. But the one thing I think you can really take away from that is that Texas really got the ground game going in that game, man. I mean, everybody's making fun of their passing attack and Quinn Ewers and, are they going to replace him with Arch Manning or whatever? But Texas has a pretty balanced offense, man. When it's a defense that isn't as good at stopping the run, Texas ran all over Clemson, man. And I'm not sure that they're not going to be able to do it against Arizona State. Arizona State, they're still a finesse team, man, that was in the Pac-12 until this year. The Big 12 is pretty finesse as well. So Arizona State, they're not very physical, and I don't know how they're going to handle a very physical team like Texas. Texas may very well be able to get the ball like going on the ground there, like establish the run in this game like they did against Clemson. Clemson is probably a better team than Arizona State too, man. So I think I slightly would say Clemson is a little bit better than Arizona State. I think faces a little bit more of a difficult schedule than Arizona State did, even though the ACC is a little bit down as well. So again, I mean, I think Texas has a lot of advantages here. As I said, Texas is probably the best defense in the entire country. Arizona State has not faced a defense like Texas all year, and everybody's hyping up Arizona State. Like, look how much they've scored. They put up like 40-something points against Iowa State in the Big 12 championship. But again, as I mentioned, Iowa State, you think of them as a good defense, but this year they are not. You saw what they did in the Pop-Tart Bowl. Although I know defenses might not necessarily show up in a bowl like that, but they gave up a lot of points in that game too. So Iowa State, I don't think their defense is very good. So Arizona State putting up that kind of point total against them, I think that it doesn't look quite as good as you think it might look. And everybody's, going crazy about Arizona State having Scattaboo there, whatever the hell his name is. He's skitting and scatting all over the place. He's shitting and sharting all over the place. Scattaboo. I mean, I like watching this guy. Like, he is fun to watch, but do you really think he's going to be able to do that much damage against Texas? Who, again, like I said, Texas probably has the best defense in the country. Texas, I think, almost certainly has the best pass defense in the country. So they should be able to take the passing game away from Arizona State. Arizona State does have a somewhat balanced offensive attack. That's the one kind of good thing you can say about them. But if they have to rely solely on the ground game, and I know everybody loves Scatterbo and whatever, but Texas is going to be able to know that that's what Arizona State's going to try to do. So Texas's defense should be able to hold them in check that way as well. And then the problem becomes, just like I said last night with Penn State, if you have a superior team that's probably going to be out to like a multiple score lead, which I think will probably be the case with Texas here, Arizona State's not going to be able to run the ball anymore in that situation. So Scadaboo is going to not be able to be involved as much if Texas gets out to a lead. Arizona State's going to have to start throwing the ball into Texas's like number one pass defense in the country. Doesn't look good, man. Like, I think Arizona State's going to struggle if that's the case. I think they won't be equipped enough to come back in the game if that's the case. So I do lean to Texas, but I think maybe the better way to play this would actually be to play the under in this game, which is weird. I know, liking a team to cover a double-digit spread, but also liking the under at the same time does seem a little weird. Nate, happy New Year's to you as well, man. Thanks for hanging out. Good to see you. But I think that maybe those are both the correct ways to play this. The total's pretty high at 52, 83% of tickets, 87% of the cash on the over. Public's only going to want to come in and play an over in this game. And I mean, they just saw Texas put up 38 against Clemson. They just saw Arizona State the last time they played put up 40, whatever, 45, 47, whatever it was against Iowa State. But I said, remember, Iowa State's defense, they're not in the same league as Texas's defense, man. I mean, it's beyond night and day here. This is like a different universe of defense here. So do I think Arizona State's going to be able to get into the 40s in this game? No, obviously I do not think that. And then you got Texas. I mean, if they're trying to establish the ground game like they've been able to do in pretty much all of the recent games except Georgia, which is kind of weird, as I'll talk about it in a minute. Georgia hasn't really had the best run defense recently, but for some reason, Texas hasn't done that well against them. So I don't know what the deal is with that. But Texas, they've been able to run the ball against like all of their other recent opponents. I don't see why it would really be different against Arizona State here. So Texas is going to be putting it on the ground a lot and playing defense in this game. Seems like it could wind up being a lower scoring, more defensive game. Arizona State, again, probably likes to try to run the ball more than they like to throw the ball. And if they're going to try to stay in a game as a double-digit underdog, they're probably going to want to try to slow the pace of the game down as well and keep the ball away from Texas's offense as well, even though their defense is probably the best unit on the field still. So, I mean, either way you look at it, it doesn't look like Arizona State is going to be able to find a way to be able to win this game, but also the under might be the way this game winds up being played. It's a pretty high total, so it's kind of the way I look at that one there. The Rose Bowl is the next game up, which is always in kind of the mid-afternoon, early evening at 5 p.m. Eastern. All these games are separated out a little bit so that they all get their own isolated game. They're all on ESPN. Today is the college playoff game, and so Penn State, Boise State got a little bit screwed having to play on a day with other bowl games. So they still had a game where they were the only college football game being played. All the other bowl games were done by the time that game started. This is number 8, Ohio State against number 1, Oregon in the Rose Bowl, presented by Prudential, man, which Prudential might be a new sponsor. I think it's usually presented by, I don't remember who the sponsor has been. I don't have anything to really be able to make fun of them for this one. But this is a matchup where I think we're looking at something that's a little bit misleading here, man. When you have an undefeated Oregon team who's number 1 in the country, they've been number 1 all year, and Ohio State is number 8 in the playoff seeding. But yet, and Ohio State has 2 losses, yet Ohio State is the favorite. And they've gone up from 1 to now 2.5, going through the 2.5 with juice here. Something is going on here, man. The odds makers are telling you Ohio State is actually the better team in this game, despite what the records might tell you, despite what the rankings are telling you, man. I mean, I would trust the odds makers more than I would trust the guys that do the rankings, because the guys that do the rankings, they don't have millions of dollars at stake here. You know who does? The Vegas odds maker. So you want to try to trust the Vegas odds makers a little bit when there's a big disparity like this. So Ohio State, to me, looks like they are the correct side in this game. The odds makers are telling you this. And I'm all like kind of discombobulated here. Like I was going to say one other thing about Arizona State, and I forget what I was going to say about Arizona State as far as their like, I don't know what I was going to say, man. I was going to say one other thing about Arizona State versus Texas, and now it slipped my mind. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't that important. But anyway, Ohio State, Oregon in the Rose Bowl. I mean, this looks like a typical Rose Bowl matchup as well. It's former Pac-12 against Big Ten team. But these are both Big Ten teams. Now, both teams played already, and we know Oregon won the game by 1, But as I was saying, man, Ohio State was actually a 3-point favorite in that game on the road at Oregon. And I know Oregon won by 1, but it was a close game. Oregon's defense gave up a lot of points in that game. It was 33-32, I think. So Oregon's defense did not really hold up their end of the bargain in that game. It was a high-scoring game. I thought it was a bad spot for Ohio State there because Ohio State was having to go out to Eugene, Oregon, play on the Pacific Coast. I know this is a Pacific Coast game as well, but having to go to a true road environment like that, which is an environment you're not familiar with, going to Oregon because Oregon was new to the conference, it looked like it was a bad spot for Ohio State, man. But as far as this game is concerned, I think it's a much, much better spot for Ohio State this time. In that game, Ohio State almost won that game. There was bad clock management at the end of that game with Will Howard there. They made a couple of mistakes at the end of that game. I don't know if I necessarily trust Ryan Day to be like the best coach here, but I don't think either of the coaches in this game are really that experienced in huge games like this or trustworthy. So I think Ryan Day might actually be the one who's more experienced and more trustworthy in big pressure games like this. So as crazy as it is to say, but in that game, Ohio State was going to get in field goal range and they were going to have a chance to kick a potentially game-winning field goal in that game. And they ran out of time because they mismanaged the clock. So Ohio State was very close to being able to win that game at Oregon. Oh, the other thing I was going to say about Texas Arizona State real quick, which is another thing I'm going to say about Oregon here, is that Arizona State has been off for a while now. I know both Arizona State and Oregon played in their conference championship games, but Texas and Ohio State played last week, man. So I think that's better for Texas and Ohio State. I said the same thing about Penn State versus Boise State last night as well. When you have these teams that played in even though they played in their conference championship, they didn't play last week. So they have like basically 2 weeks off, and that can start turning into rust, man. Like when you're rolling, you don't want to have that much time off, man, because it can really hurt your momentum. Whereas for Texas and Ohio State, getting that win last week, getting that first playoff game out of the way, that can help a lot, man. Like it helps get your nerves out of the way because you've already played a playoff game. You're already used to playing in a playoff environment like this. So that's a little bit different, man. You have that, and you played a little bit more recently, and you still have a little bit of extra time off because they've had a little bit over a week off because these teams played last Saturday. So I think that is a pretty significant advantage as well to both Texas and Ohio State here, and I guess to Notre Dame, but I'll talk about that game in a minute. So yeah, I think it's an advantage to Texas and Ohio State here. Oh, and by the way, I completely forgot. This is my other play today. Ohio State is the play at -2.5. I wish that I went in and got the -1. I mean, maybe you'll see this move back down a little bit, but I don't know because it looks like it's headed towards 3. If you want Ohio State, you got to get in at below 3, I would say. But I still think this line at being below a field goal is short. I think there's a lot of value on Ohio State here, man, in my opinion. I like it. It's my favorite play of the day. I think it's also, again, like I said, it's very misleading and it's very anti-public as well. So I like all of that. You know how I do these things. So for all those reasons, I do like Ohio State, but I have more to say about this game as well here. And again, Ohio State was a 3-point favorite at Eugene, Oregon, and now in a neutral site game, they're 2.5. So again, that makes it look like there's value. Even if you don't think Ohio State should have been a 3-point favorite at Oregon, even so, that it still means this game should probably be close to like, I mean, what should it be? It should be like maybe like Ohio State -1 or something in this game, even still something like that, which is where it opened, by the way. But I even think that's low, man. I think the Ohio State -3 at Oregon was actually a reasonable line. I think it's actually closer to the correct line, and that would indicate that Ohio State should actually probably be closer to a touchdown favorite in this game. I wouldn't go that far, but I do think that maybe like a line of about 4 or 5 actually is probably reasonable for this game. But the odds makers can't do that because they know they're going to get too much money on Ohio State if they do that. They know they have to skew the line towards Oregon a little bit. They know they're going to get too much money on Oregon, if they line Ohio State as a huge favorite like that or as a bigger favorite, the money would come in way too significantly on Oregon. But here with the line where it is, it looks like they're splitting the cash pretty well here. And you have still the public is coming in on Oregon. I mean, why wouldn't they? Oregon beat Ohio State already. They haven't lost all year. They're the number 1 ranked team against the number 8 team, and they're getting points. It looks way too easy to take Oregon in this game. And again, when it looks suspicious, it usually is. 62% of the tickets on Oregon, but only 51% of the cash. So I can tell you that basically all the professionals that I listen to all like the Ohio State side. I obviously agree with them. I've liked the Ohio State side. As soon as I saw the bracket come out, this being a potential matchup and a kind of likely matchup, I was like, man, it's going to be a nice matchup to play Ohio State. You're probably going to get value on the line on Ohio State. I think you still are. And then also, if you like Ohio State and the line is 3, so you don't really want to lay 3 anymore, you can look to the money line in Ohio State, man, because again, the money line is a separate market. And in a big game like this, the public's going to be taking Oregon on the money line as well, man. They're going to see that underdog price and be like, oh, I get to play 100 to try to win like 120, 130 on Oregon. That looks pretty nice, right? Again, I don't think that's the case. So again, you might be able to get a nice line on Ohio State. If you can get like minus 130 something on the Ohio State money line and you just get them to win the game, that looks good too. But anything on the spread at 2.5 or less, I think is also value there because it's below that very key number of 3, the winning by a field goal there. Anything below a field goal, I mean, like I said, I think Ohio State should be above a field goal favorite in this game. I think they're that much better than Oregon. I actually think Ohio State is better on both sides of the ball than Oregon is, man. I think Ohio State has a significantly better defense. I mean, Oregon has shown vulnerability on defense, man. I mean, Ohio State themselves got into the 30s against Oregon, even though I know Oregon got into the 30s back against Ohio State, but it was a game that was at Oregon. I don't know if Oregon's going to be able to repeat that, even though, yes, Oregon does have a very good offense, but Ohio State, their offense at the very least can match Oregon's, man, especially when Oregon's defense isn't as good. I think Ohio State's offense is pretty much as good as Oregon's is. And we're looking at Will Howard against Dylan Gabriel. You got both teams have good quarterbacks here. I don't think either of these quarterbacks has been in a game at this level of like pressure here, man, because Dylan Gabriel's coming over from Oklahoma. Will Howard's coming over from Kansas State. So this is going to be a step up for both of these teams here. But as far as these programs are concerned, it is Ohio State that's more used to being in playoffs like this, man. You know what I mean? I mean, Ohio State was in the playoffs 2 years ago. Although, of course, I don't know that many of the guys from then are back for this game, but this is at least a program that's used to it. And I don't know how long Ryan Day's been there, but he may be the more experienced coach in games at this level as well. And if you remember 2 years ago, Ohio State played really well in the semifinal and almost were able to pull off the upset against the eventual champion Georgia, which I believe that was 2 years ago, right? That was a close game. I think I won money on Ohio State plus the points in that. They played really close against Georgia. Ohio State was a good team that year. They're a good team this year. Ohio State, as I've been saying most of the year, Ohio State may be the best team in the entire country, man. So this is going to be a battle. And then whoever wins this game is going to face the winner of Texas and Arizona State, which again is why I liked Texas going far in my bracket, because that game is going to be in Texas at the Cotton Bowl. And whoever wins this game is going to be pretty beat up, man, coming out of their biggest win of the season. So it's going to be crazy. So hopefully Texas does win for my bracket's sake as well, because it will set up pretty nicely for Texas in that game, to be honest, man. Even if I don't think they're better than these two teams, it's going to set up pretty nicely for them. I think maybe they're actually better than Oregon, but not Ohio State. I mean, it's just a crazy situation where Oregon's just not actually the best team in the country, man. So again, for all those reasons, give me Ohio State. I like it. It's my favorite play of the day. At below a field goal, or if you want to take Ohio State at a decent money line price, that's what I would do. And then finally, we do have the Sugar Bowl at night at 8:45 p.m. Eastern time. This is Notre Dame, number 7, against Georgia, number 2. This is the hardest game for me to figure out the side in this one, and there are professional bettors who are on opposite sides on this one as well. This one's a little bit crazy, man. It's supposed to be the most defensive of all the matchups, with the total still going up from 43 to 45.5, though. Juice to the under, and it looks like money is coming in on the over a little bit. 69% of tickets, 91% of the cash. So I don't know. The over looks too easy in the Rose Bowl, by the way. I wouldn't want to try to buck it, but 92% of the tickets, 88% of the cash on the over in that one, and it's up from 53.5 to 55.5. I mean, obviously, everybody's going to see that Oregon and Ohio State put up 60 whatever against each other the last time they played. I think the over looks like obvious here, but I don't know that I would necessarily want to try playing the under in that game. It seems very dangerous. I mean, you could very well see both of those teams put up points in that game again. I mean, who knows? But the other thing I was going to say quickly, actually, before I get to Notre Dame, Georgia, Ohio State and Oregon, the other thing about these two teams, if you look at some of their common opponents, man, I mean, well, Oregon, they did play Boise State, and they gave up a lot of points against Boise State. And we saw Boise State get shut down by a better defense in Penn State yesterday. So, I mean, giving up that many points to Boise doesn't look that great to me, to be honest with Oregon. And Oregon, they put up a lot of points against Boise, but Oregon was still getting used to having Dylan Gabriel there, man. So I don't know. So maybe Oregon's offense was still kind of trying to figure it out. So maybe that's one nod towards Oregon, but that's really the only thing you'd say about that, I think. But if you look at their common opponents, especially Penn State, look at how different the game was against Penn State. Ohio State went into Penn State, and I know Penn State had quarterback issues in that game, but Ohio State held them to 13 points in Happy Valley, beat them in Happy Valley by 7. Oregon played them in the Big Ten Championship and gave up 38 points, I think, to them or something like that. It was whatever. It was 40-something to 30-something. Penn State, that offense lit Oregon up pretty much and put up a ton of points against them. So again, it looks like there's a huge difference in the defensive capabilities of these two teams, man. And I would not want to have my money on the lesser of those defenses on the Oregon side. It was night and day with how those two teams performed against Penn State specifically. And Ohio State did it on the road, and Oregon did that in a neutral site game. So even more impressive. That was a very impressive game for Ohio State, man. Even if Alar was like, he kind of hurt or maybe wasn't playing in that game against Penn State, whatever it was, or for Penn State, whatever it was. But still, I think that's more impressive for Ohio State there. And then looking at some of their other games, I mean, I think we can look real quick. I think both teams played a couple of other common opponents here. I actually forget. Maybe they didn't. I don't know. They both played some of these awful teams. They both played Purdue. Ohio State completely shut them out. Oregon, I think, also dominated them. I mean, Purdue sucks. So who cares? They both shut them out, actually. And then Oregon won at the Big House at Michigan pretty easily. I think Ohio State lost to Michigan, right? So people are going to actually look at that, and that would be another reason for the public to take Oregon, right? Oh, my God, Ohio State lost to Michigan horribly, and Oregon blew them out at Michigan, and Ohio State lost to them at home, man. Like, so, and that's the one that's more recent in people's minds. Everybody's knocking Ohio State because of that loss to Michigan at home. But again, I don't think Ohio State paid that much attention to that game, man. I mean, Ohio State knew they were going to be in the playoff already. I think they were getting ready for it, and it allowed them to skip the Big Ten championship, skip it. So I think that helped Ohio State because it gave them a week of rest at a better point. They didn't have to play the Big Ten championship and beat themselves up against a really good team. And then they had an easy win to rebuild their confidence against Tennessee and get that first playoff game out of the way. So it looks really good for Ohio State for that reason as well, man. So, I mean, I guess I'm done talking about that game, but that looks a little bit better. And Oregon, I think, has been off for a little bit too long now as well. So, again, that's kind of the way I look at that game. Ohio State is the way. What are you talking about, Nate? I don't even know. The trans property. This isn't the trans perfect Music City Bowl anymore. All right, Notre Dame and Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, where the game is still being played, by the way, because in New Orleans last night, there was, I don't know the details, there was some sort of terrorist attack where somebody drove a truck into a bunch of people and killed like 10 to 12 people and injured 30 something. I don't know what the deal was there, but there was a mass truck attack last night on Bourbon Street in New Orleans during the very drunken New Year's celebration in New Orleans. Don't know what the deal is with that. This game is still going on as scheduled, though. Can't stop the Sugar Bowl, man. Sugar, honey, honey. This is the all-state Sugar Bowl, as it has been for quite a while now. You were my candy girl. Yeah, I don't know I don't know how to read this game, man, because I've been leaning to Georgia all week in this game, man, to be honest. Notre Dame, we see a split from a 1.5-point favorite to a 1.5-point dog to a 1-point favorite, with 52% of tickets, 53% of the cash coming in on the Notre Dame side. This one is really difficult for me to gauge, man. And we got a low total, like I said, although it's gone up a little bit, but this is expected to be the most defensive of all the games. Maybe the total's skewed a little bit, but again, Notre Dame, we saw what they did last week. Like, yeah, they played last week. Yeah, all state. They're there to protect you from mayhem, like that truck attack last night. I don't know if All State was able to protect those people there. Notre Dame, they have an advantage, as I mentioned, because they played last week and they got the win. So they get that first playoff win out of the way. Georgia has been off. So again, that might hurt Georgia a little bit. Georgia's been off for even longer because they didn't even play in the SEC championship game, right? Or did they? No, they did. What am I saying? Wait, yeah, they did against Texas, right? What am I saying? Yeah, they did. They played against, I'm an idiot. Yeah, they won. That's why they're the number 2 team. I'm an idiot. Yeah, Georgia won the SEC title, excuse me, against Texas. So yeah, Georgia played a difficult game there. But again, when you play, I don't know, man. So yeah, I mean, that's one advantage to Notre Dame, I guess, because Notre Dame got to play last week. They played an easier game. If you look at what Notre Dame did in that game, though, their offense really did not impress me. I mean, their defense was certainly impressive, but Indiana, I just don't think is that good a team, man, to be honest. I mentioned it going into that game. Indiana played an extremely weak schedule. And what Notre Dame did in that game, which may lead you towards maybe looking at an under in this game, is that Notre Dame, they really played a possession game, man. They held on to the ball like as long as possible. It was a really ugly, slow, low-scoring game where they held Indiana to 3 points until the final minute and a half of the game, and then Indiana scored, recovered an onside kick, and then scored again, and almost covered, and missed a 2-point conversion, I think, or something, whatever it was. I forget. Almost covered some of the bigger numbers, I guess, in that game. And Notre Dame was still going to cover like the 7 or whatever. But it was just a weird kind of game. But Notre Dame played a really slow, ugly game. And one takeaway that I had from watching some of that game is I'm not impressed by Notre Dame's offense, man. And then you got Georgia with a backup quarterback in here. So maybe the under does kind of make sense in this game because I don't think Notre Dame, I know their rushing attack is really good, but Notre Dame has a really good physical defense. They run the ball and their passing attack is really not very good. In my opinion, I'm not a Riley Leonard fan. I don't think he's very good. Is that his name? I forget all these players' names now. Yeah, I think it's Riley Leonard. Georgia, again, we know that they have a backup quarterback in because Carson Beck is out. He's having surgery. He's not going to play for the remainder of the year, for the remainder of the playoffs. He got hurt. But that's kind of the main reason why I actually leaned to Georgia in this game, though, despite what we see in the market right now, is that I think Georgia's being a little bit undervalued. I know there are some professional handicappers who are saying that Notre Dame is the better team. I'm not sure I quite agree with that, man. I mean, the odds makers are at least telling you that if Beck was playing for Georgia, Georgia would be the favorite in this game for sure, probably by about 4 points or so. But I think that you're knocking Georgia too much, man. I know Gunnar Stockton, we don't know what we're gonna get out of him. I know he really does not have that much experience. Beck is the much more experienced quarterback, but Stockton at least played in the SEC championship game in a pressure environment, man, in the SEC championship game against Texas, and he was able to lead them to a win. I know Texas just hasn't played well against Georgia, but that shows you something. If Stockton can come into that game in a close game where basically every play matters down the stretch, and he was able to help them win that game in a pressure environment. So I think in a way that kind of gets that monkey like off the back for Stockton. He might be able to be ready to go. And this is the one situation where I think having extra time off like Georgia does here, not having played last week, might actually help Georgia a little bit in this game because of the Beck injury. Now they have an extra week to prepare and to scheme around knowing that Gunnar Stockton is going to be their quarterback. They actually get to game plan around him. So I think this is maybe the one situation where actually not having played last week actually might not be a disadvantage to Georgia because they know it's going to be Gunnar Stockton and they get that extra time to try to prepare something for this. So I actually like all of that for Georgia. As far as where this game is being played, I mean, I don't think that the venue matters that much, although I think Georgia is kind of more used to playing in an environment like this in these like big NFL stadiums, although Notre Dame did play in a couple of them this year, so I don't think it matters that much. But the other thing is that, I mean, everybody's talking about this quarterback injury for Georgia. Yeah, sure. I mean, that does matter, but it's being factored into the line. Like I said, I think it's being over-factored into the line. So again, you could be looking at like an injured player theory type of spot where Georgia is going to play even harder because they know their quarterback is out. But also nobody's talking about Georgia's defense, really. It's like their defense didn't go anywhere. Georgia's defense is still here. And I know I mentioned Georgia's defense has had some bad performances. They lapsed. Like they really actually did bad. Their rushing defense actually was really bad against UMass, which is kind of a red flag. It doesn't look good. But then again, you could argue that maybe Georgia's didn't give a shit about that game. I mean, are they really going to come in and have full focus and play full effort against UMass? Probably not. But again, Notre Dame, they may be able to do some damage on the ground in this game against Georgia because their run defense actually hasn't been that good. But the problem is Georgia's going to know that's what Notre Dame is going to do, man. Notre Dame is a one-dimensional offense. Notre Dame can't really throw the ball. So if Georgia knows what they're going to be trying to do on offense, that makes it easier for Georgia's defense. And Georgia is still one of the better defenses Notre Dame has faced all year, man. I mean, Notre Dame, you talk about, yeah, Indiana's schedule was weak this year, but so was Notre Dame's. Notre Dame is not even in a conference. They did not have a very strong schedule this year, man. I mean, they played Texas A&M. I think they did win that game, but they really did not have that strong a schedule, man. So they're really kind of stepping up in class now for this game against Georgia. Georgia is not Indiana, man. Georgia, even with a backup quarterback, Georgia is a more dangerous team than Indiana. And I don't even think it's that close, really. And Notre Dame also, of course, had a little bit of the fact that it was a little bit of an edge because they were playing in their home stadium last week as well. Although, of course, Indiana didn't have to travel that far for that game. It's still Indiana. I just don't think they even belonged here, man. Georgia, I believe that they do. And the other thing about Georgia, they're the team that has more experience playing in a game like this, even though I know Gunnar Stockton doesn't have a whole lot. Like I said, at least he got that SEC championship, got some like reps in that game and in a real pressure situation and actually was able to win the game. So that might help give him a little bit of confidence. But Georgia, the rest of this team, man, I mean, this is fucking Georgia, man. And they won 2 championships the 2 years prior to last year. Their coach is still there, Kirby Smart. So as far as which one of these teams has more experience playing in a game at this level, well, the answer is Georgia, obviously. I mean, this is a team that has a real championship pedigree here in recent years. They still have some guys who are used to playing games like that. They have guys that were in the SEC championship last year. Obviously, they were in the SEC championship this year. Notre Dame isn't even in a conference, so they didn't play in a conference championship game at all. And Kirby Smart has been here before, of course. Notre Dame, I mean, you talk about Gunnar Stockton being inexperienced, but Riley Leonard kind of is too, right? Like, when has he ever played in a game at this level, you know? So, again, I mean, that's how I look at this game. I lean to Georgia. I'm not going to play it. But I also think the under might make sense here as well, because I think both teams might struggle a little bit trying to pass the ball. You might wind up seeing a bit of a more defensive game in this one, and that's the way that I look at it. Yes, I'm going with Georgia. Yes, you bet Georgia. Oh, boy. Wet socks. What's up, my man? I mean, I agree with it. I don't hate it. Like I said, the professional bettors that I listen to, they all kind of they're split on some of these games, man. Like they don't seem to have a huge feeling on the side on Texas, Arizona State. They are very strong on Ohio State. Everyone that I listen to likes Ohio State. Very strong professional opinions on that one. And then this game, they seem to have pretty strong opinions on this game, but they're completely split. I hear strong opinions on both sides of this one. So it's kind of crazy. Notre Dame beat more ranked teams than Georgia. Yeah, well, what ranked teams are we talking about? Navy and Army? Do you think Navy and Army are better than like Texas? What are we talking about here? Georgia beat Texas twice. Georgia played Alabama to within 3 and came all the way back against Alabama. Say what you will about Alabama. That was still a huge game. That was not an easy game at all. Georgia's faced a way more difficult schedule. It's not even close. They're way more battle tested facing this SEC slate. Those ranked teams that Notre Dame face, again, like I said, Navy and Army, those are not actual top 25 teams, man. Those teams, I mean, come on. They don't play against physical defenses like this. Notre Dame completely manhandled both of them, and I told you that they would. I had both those games very correct. So, I mean, we'll see what happens here, but and then, I mean, if you want to go that route, you could say, well, Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. So they have the worst loss. That's worse than any of Georgia's losses. So, I mean, what do you want? I don't know. But Georgia, yeah, I mean, they have played some games where they didn't play well, where they really underperformed. So we'll see what happens, man. Again, it's a tough read, tough handicap. I mean, I'm not going to play this game, but that's going to do it for me, man. A long episode today, 1 hour, but my only 2 plays, all of that for 2 plays. Missouri State -4 in college basketball. I have it at 4.5 here, but I'm pretty sure that there are 4s very abundantly out there right now. I haven't played it yet, but I'm going to. And then Ohio State -2.5 in college football in the Rose Bowl, or play them on the money line or whatever. But I do like Ohio State a lot in that game. Let's kick off the new year with a 2-0 day, man. Come on. I'm sick of losing. Last year, losing year, I had my two best years were the two prior years. So at least if you guys jumped on at the tail end of last year, I started doing this show mid last year. So at least if you were following me back then, I had an awesome run at the end of 2023. So hopefully that makes up for the 2024 not being that good. I think since mid 2023, I'm pretty sure I'm still up overall. So 2024 wasn't good. It was a slight down year. I was just below the break-even point. It wasn't by that much. So it was actually less bad than my other losing year in 2015, which came on the heels of a pretty good 2014. So let's go. It's a new year. Let's get some wins. Let's not be, let's hope we're going to get some wins this time here, man. That's going to do it. Thanks everybody for hanging out. I'm Tower Gang Toad. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter, Tower Gang Podcast, patreon.com/Tower Gang. You can throw us some support for the most offensive comedy podcast on the planet. You get live pre-show, post-show. Hang out with us in a Telegram. And I believe we'll be on tonight at 9-11 p.m. Eastern, back on Wednesday night, man. So look out for that as well. I got to set up the streams and stuff. That's going to do it for me. Peace out, everybody.